Contact 321 contact. All right, so maybe we can ask you, Vladimir. So you have your philosophy group, and you talked about courage this week. Do you want to give us? We can start with
Once
the
again,
courage topic.
once again, it's not philosophy group. It's just
I'm
English.
sorry, the
Yeah,
discussion group. Yeah,
English speaking club.
right.
I just choose philosophical topics because I like to study them, and it keeps me motivating to lead the group and work on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
but this week we are discussing courage, and I spent almost the whole week studying the concept. And like I started by trying to make up some questions.
so can you formulate a question to get us started on the courage?
Yeah,
And
sure. I actually,
we don't need to talk about courage the whole time, but I think it's a cool topic to start with.
the first thing, like, how can we measure courage?
How can what?
How can we measure courage? Like, is
Okay.
there any way to say that?
So
No,
how can we measure courage? Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good question to start with. Does anyone have an answer?
And especially like not somebody else's courage, but your level of courage. How can you know that, whether you're courageous or, not courageous?
My answer to those kinds of questions generally is, why would I need to?
Well,
To
Why do
measure
I
I
it?
mean,
need to measure it?
if we could categorize it, and then we could then in any way say our category pertains to any observable instances, and then we could say this instance is of more, this instance is of less, then by those means there would be quantity that we can measure. And courage as it was ethically observed may be of a qualia, so we'd have the synthesis to say we had
Well,
measure.
what you just said is, I think we can put an ordering on it, which is not the same thing as assigning quantities to it, right? We can say A is
No,
greater
no,
than
no.
B without
Yes.
values for A and B.
Yeah. Sorry if that was a mistake. I wanted to say quality and quantity because that's what Aristotle talks about, and I know that's where he's getting it from. So I just want to kind of loop it back there.
Also, Frank is probably drunk, so there's that.
Only a little. Get off my back.
Well,
Well,
maybe it's not an interesting question. Let's take this one. Like, how can we develop it? If you, for example, want to
yeah.
develop courage, like, is there any certain way which any course of action which you might take? And
Is it okay? So can I just like rephrase that just a little
yeah,
bit?
sure, sure.
So is it can so isn't it like what you're trying to ask? Maybe it's also, or at least it's related to that. Is it a natural thing, or is it something you work on? Courage.
Yeah, I think that you may certainly do, like, at least try to do something to become more courageous if you feel that you have not enough. And for example, in
Okay.
many situations, you want to do something, but fear holds you back. And just by trying to confront your fear, it seems that you may like learn to be more courageous. But it's kind of problematic because sometimes in some situations you might just develop the skill, like in speaking. For I remember the times when I couldn't speak English, and it was really hard to have a conversation. But then I learned to speak more and more, and now it seems like I may communicate with people quite easily. But it's like just in this domain, but in different domains, like I still have to work on almost on everything when I have fear, and it seems very very difficult.
All right. Well, I guess if you wanted to develop courage or anything that could be distinguished as technique or skill in this context, it would be about recognizing applicable situations that could be in term given context called analogous, and then reapplying over time and time again and developing that skill.
Yeah, but it's just like working on these situations, is it help you to develop your kind of eternal courage, or is just developing your skill? So I mean,
That would, if it was properly developing the categorized, either internal courage or just some other skill, that would be categorical. That would be about the ability. Are you identifying it right? Or is maybe your identification, your definition, not sufficient or seeming to tend towards something else, or not, something else is going on, that's almost like having a hypothesis that doesn't align with your results. Are you going to reformulate your hypothesis, or are you just going to keep running in there trying to, strong arm your hypothesis, expecting a different result? I
That's
don't
a
know. I
good-
may be going.
That's a good perspective, Frank. Before we do that, could I get you all to help me understand what we mean by courage by giving me an example of the thing you're talking about? Because there are different kinds of courage. There's,
moral courage,
Yeah.
physical courage.
I think that's a good idea. Let's if we're talking about courage, yeah, maybe we should do the classic philosophical thing. And what is courage? I think I like that.
There's some definitions. I actually wrote them down. For example, in Wikipedia, they say it's the choice and willingness to confront agony, pain, danger, uncertainty, or intimidation. Oxford Dictionary defines it as the ability to do something dangerous or to face pain or opposition without showing fear. Yeah, and Cambridge Dictionary almost the same, the ability to control your fear in dangerous or difficult situations. Basically, it all connects to controlling your fear. It's not the absence of fear, because if you have no fear, there's nothing courageous. But if you have fear and you need to do something what makes you, afraid, if you are able to control this fear, if in spite of the fear you are able to act out of a place of courage, it's just like something courageous.
fear is learned, and so is courage.
Mhm.
Well, I would say that courage is not really, if we're going with opposites, and a lot of virtues are the opposite of something, of a flaw. Courage
Unless
is,
they're distinguished as the golden mean by Aristotle.
Yeah, we discussed it earlier.
okay. So courage is not the opposite of fear. I think courage is the opposite of being cowardly. So being a coward and being brave, those are, I would say, opposites.
There's like, according to Aristotle, there's fear and confidence, and courage is the middle between fear and confidence. So it's not between courage and cowardice. It's like,
Fear and confidence.
yeah, foolhardy versus a coward.
Okay, so that's that. Well, I mean,
I was
that's another way to go about it. But in any case, I do think so. Obviously, there are many possible definitions, and really no definition is right. We're just discussing mostly concept semantics, but it seems that
I would hazard a guess that for many people, getting up and getting out of bed in the morning is an act of courage.
Possibly.
well, that's kind of like a
Yeah, but it's like kind of, it's inevitable.
it's not
No, not necessarily. I
You don't need to-
wouldn't say that at all. If you know
Unless-
people who
yeah,
suffer
if it-
from depression, you would not necessarily draw that conclusion.
But
Yeah, but
what I
probably-
was gonna say, just to have like a common thing to all those definitions, I think we can agree on. We're talking about overcoming fear in some way, right? All those definitions.
Yeah,
point
but
to-
the problem may be also on the opposite pole. So you may be like foolhardy, and you need to overcome this, and it's also maybe a problem. So it's not just you fight with your fear. You may fight with your restlessness as well.
Yeah. Although to take it back to not to Aristotle but to Plato, anytime when Plato did deal with I'm remembering correctly now, he did deal with fear, courage, and foolhardiness. And that was where he famously distinguished the only thing that really separates, these virtues from these, abhorrent actions is really wisdom. He famously had his Socrates say, the only true evil is ignorance. And the thing is, if fear is existent in the face of real danger of something you should be afraid of, I wouldn't say that is, something to be abhorred. I would actually say, yeah, you should be afraid and you should be taking response to that, whether it is to be a courage or a coward, fight or flight, very basic thing.
Well,
Just
fear is
like-
fear. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, no. I thought you were done.
I got no more energy in me, Bruno. Just go.
Well, fear is definitely a rational thing. I mean, it makes sense. Fear is a biological thing, right? So, faced with the danger, we feel certain things that we describe as fear, which it's a biological instinct. That's how we avoid getting eaten by giant cats. So that
Where?
it's a biological thing. It's normal to be afraid of dying because that's the way we're programmed. It's beneficial to evolution, but we have fear, which is a natural thing. Like when a soldier goes to war, he's going to be scared. Before a battle, he's going to be scared. It's normal because there's a good possibility he'll be killed, or at least a decent possibility he'll be killed. So it's normal to be scared, but then you are faced with the choices that the fear presents. Do you accept the fear and you just decide to flee, to run, and just not engage the enemy, leave the others to fight by themselves, and you desert the battlefield, or you overcome that fear in that case, which would be the appropriate response, and you act in a more courageous way, right? So, I mean, the fear is there.
Unless they all die, and then it turns out you would have been better off running.
Well,
Or if you were
it
truly
depends.
courageous, you'd have done something to make sure that you don't find yourself in that position in the first place, like say, be a conscientious objector and get thrown into jail for it. And which also I consider to be an act of true courage, right? Because, you're going to be to some extent ostracized by your society for doing so and stigmatized, but in fact, you're following the moral courage of your convictions and doing what you believe to be right, which is virtuous, even though it goes against what other people may consider to be, other people may consider it to be cowardly, which
Right.
points out that what other people think doesn't really matter.
Yeah, in Aristotle, there is a funny thing. So, like this virtue, courage, it's very rare, and it requires a lot of time to develop this virtue. And most people, Aristotle say, are kind of they either cowards or they are foolhardy. And those who are foolhardy, they treat a courageous person as a coward, and those who are cowards, they treat a courageous person as a foolhardy. And if you are like if you are a courageous person, you not only like have pain confronting your fears, you also like always mistreated and misrepresented in your by other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this foolhardy thing, so he's talking about the right thing is in the middle, right? And the
Mhm.
foolhardy person is just one that goes overboard. Is that do I have a good understanding?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
The foolhardy person who survives may be considered courageous, and the one who doesn't wins the Darwin Award.
Yeah, well, in Crack's example, where you confront your society, and when you say that, for example, I'm not gonna go to war, and people who are going into the war, they just say that you are a coward, but you actually like you consider them as foolhardy in this case. You say no, it's like, I'm not coward. You just foolhardy. You follow some whatever.
Well, yeah, yeah, we're already opening up like a couple of different questions here, but so, because I've been reading like Walden, right, by Thoreau. So he presents the argument of being a conscientious objector quite eloquently. In his case, I think it was the Mexican-American War. He didn't agree with the Mexican-American War, so he was willing to go to jail, not to participate in the war. But I think, and I mean, I agree with. I think you're presenting the case, Craig, that the right thing, the most courageous thing, is not always to fight. It's sometimes not to fight when you're expected to. And yeah, I mean, that's a different kind of courage. It also takes some courage if you're willing to accept the consequences, right? Which Thoreau specifically was, of being thrown in jail.
It could be that it all depends on whether or not you feel that a given war is morally justified.
Yes.
If you didn't feel like it was right that the United States was fighting a war in Vietnam, and you objected to that war, and decided you wouldn't go, maybe that was the brave thing, and maybe the cowardly thing is to go and fight in that war that you feel is not morally justified, because you're afraid of the ramifications of not doing so.
Yeah, although I don't think it's as clear cut as that, right? It isn't just a question of this is courage, this is coward, because there's plenty of space in between.
I'm not painting with a brush that everybody who feels a given way is motivated by the same thing.
Sure.
I'm just saying that enough, more than enough to matter, are.
Not what we would call in mathematics a non-trivial number of them. Yeah, it'd be that way.
I mean, but there are different. I think there's still a substance there that is present. It doesn't matter if you're the soldier in the battlefield or if you're the conscientious objector. There's still a substance. You are scared of something, and you still go ahead with it because you believe it's the right thing. That's what the soldier believes in before he charges against the enemy, right? He doesn't, nobody, especially in modern warfare, nobody's like crazy to go charge the enemy. I mean, it's not a particularly pleasant thing to do. There's a good chance you'll get shot, so nobody does that because they want to. They do it out of a sense of duty, and discipline. The conscientious objector, if it is the case that there might be consequences, that's also true courage, because I think of Vietnam, but Gandhi, for example, like the whole India thing. I mean, that's perhaps an even more clear-cut example of there could be real consequences, right? So it wasn't like you're doing something out of cowardice, really. I mean, they were brave. They were doing something brave. That they probably didn't want to do. They didn't want to stand in front of the British Army and give the other cheek. And those are different kinds of courage, but at the same time, there is the same common element. You're doing something that you believe is right, even though the consequences might be bad. It would be easier for the Indian conscientious objector just to, turn around and leave, just like the soldier. Very similar.
You know,
So
go ahead.
thank you. The big thing I heard when David talked is just on the grounds of moral justification, or when we're calling these people, can they be courageous in this circumstances, or even in the circumstance that seems to be the opposite, not necessarily negation of the other circumstance. In both cases, we're saying, is this person properly enacting their thought, their knowledge to the best of their ability, and standing by their moral attributes prior to it, regardless of what is coming from society or on that grounds, the conscientious objector or the soldier. In this case, in the face of what could be fear, or the case where they could be afraid of the consequences, but they're still standing their ground against it. Either going, to fight, or standing and saying, I will not fight and I will go to jail. But they have justified it to themselves and can show it to, in others, in their actions, the ethic, how they show it, that they are indeed courageous. There's nothing else there. I don't know. God.
I think for many people, it's really hard to identify actually their values. And I actually read this article. It calls implicit theory of courage. And in this article, authors, they try to measure, try to ask lay people what they think about courage. And most of the time, people just give some random responses. And it seems that even though you don't understand exactly what are your values and what do you think about courage, it still influences your behavior in many ways. So when you don't know your values, when you don't know when you don't know your principles, it's not as easy to say to find the appropriate reaction to the situation. So, for example, if I'm certain on my values and there's the situation, and I may act out of my values, but if I don't know exactly what are my values, I may fear may be just harder for me to confront and to understand better what exactly I should do or I shouldn't do in any situation. Does it make sense?
Yeah. You could almost be acting out of random impulse or almost out of mimicry for things that have happened prior without having clear distinction, which a lot of people do.
Yeah, when you know exactly what you're doing, no matter how afraid you may be, you still continue to do that because you have certain principles, which kind of basement for your actions. But most of the time, people don't articulate these principles. And in a situation, they just run away, not because they're cowards, but because they don't understand what's going on.
But there's an element, I agree with that, but there is also an element that is very natural, about courage and about being cowardly. Because you can see it, for example, with dogs, I mean, I don't know if that's something that we can discuss, but I mean, dogs are, generally speaking, courageous animals,
I've had a couple cowardly dogs. They exist.
No, they exist. That's how you see that there are ones that, dogs that are courageous, because they're exactly, there are some dogs that are cowardly, but then, and it even goes, with races of dogs, with, I mean, with the different kinds of dogs, different breeds of dogs. Sorry. German Shepherds in general, that's a breed of dog that,
I had a cowardly German Shepherd. They exist.
well, I'm sure they exist, but how many German Shepherds are cowardly? I mean, it's not the normal
At
thing.
least one.
Well,
There's
at least
one that there's at least one
fair
that
enough.
has
I'm sure there's more than one,
exists.
but
Yeah, but in
generally
animals,
speaking, German Shepherds, tend to be, pretty brave dogs. I mean, they're actually, I mean, they're bred for that. I mean, that I don't know if you guys know, but German Shepherds were bred for, war. They're war dogs. So
Mhm.
They were shepherds. I mean, yes, they also
Yeah.
did activities in war, but no, they were shepherds.
well, that's just the name. That's
well,
just the name. But
No,
No,
they
that's
are
what they
actual
were for.
shepherds.
Yep,
yeah, but
and for flocks.
They're still used as shepherds. The hell are you talking about, boyo?
well, let's
Oh, dear.
well. Where did you read that? Because the version
I
that
didn't read it. No. I have grown up with multiple shepherds, been on a farm where shepherds have herded, and have watched them do their work, and I know about shepherd lineages. Where the
Mhm.
hell are you getting your information from?
Shepherds are shepherds, terriers are terriers, and to some extent, it's more terriers who are the ones who are.
They were used in it. I'm not denying that, and
No,
they're very
no, but
good at it and very smart and loyal.
I'll check it right now, but I'm pretty sure the
Okay.
German Shepherd, the modern version of the German Shepherd, I'm pretty sure they were bred for war.
yeah. Now,
Yeah, but
I
in
wonder if what we're identifying as bravery is really aggression. In other words, they were bred aggressive. Dogs were bred with other aggressive dogs until they developed one that was good for war. Is that bravery or is it aggressiveness?
I think it's more like aggressiveness, and it's also an instinct. For example, as we discussed about people, we usually have kind of moral courage. So we have principles and we act out of these principles. But in animals, they don't like have moral courage. They just act instinctively. They don't think, oh, okay, this is the right thing to do, and I need to attack this another dog or a human, whatever. And yeah, it's more. I guess it's more in animals. It's more like an instinct, and it's not a real courage or bravery. It's just their natural predisposition to like react in certain situations without like just automatically.
Sure, of
So-
course, in human beings, you can probably say the same thing 99% of the time, is that it's basically either a conditioned reaction or an instinctive reaction, and where one actually even gets the opportunity to make that kind of a courageous moral stand. They just don't occur that often.
But that's why it's important when you think about it. For example, if you know that you are kind of weak person, or maybe you're foolhardy, so you understand that you may just think and develop this quality in yourself in order to then in certain situations act out of courage without thinking. But still, it's like you may be aware that you possess this quality or emotion or whatever you call this thing, and just work on it to make yourself a better person.
I have to think on that one, sort that
Alright.
out in my head. I mean, one of the things with animals, right, is sometimes it's very frequently the animal that runs away is the one that lives long enough to be able to breed and pass on their
Yeah.
genes to the next generation. Whereas the ones
In humans
that-
also. In
yeah,
humans
right,
also,
the ones that jump out in front.
Well, I just read a little bit about the German Shepherd. I think you're right, Frank. I think I mean it was that's why it became
That's fine.
the World War II was when the dog became popular worldwide, but it wasn't bred for that. I mean, I think I was thinking about Mastiffs actually.
Well,
But,
they are called
Okay.
German Shepherds.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, the modern German Shepherd is
has been used in military work, is intelligent, and is used all the time. But
yeah. I mean,
when it
there's
was
a whole,
initially bred, it is, and people still use them. They're shepherds.
yeah. No, I mean it makes sense. I mean it makes more sense because they're called Shepherd. I mean the modern German Shepherd. I mean it was basically it was this guy that loved dogs and he found a German Shepherd and he decided that he was the perfect dog. So that's why it started. This was in Germany. can tell you.
That does sound German.
Yeah, it was in the very early 1900s, and then they became extremely popular with World War II, and everybody admired them, even though they were more associated with the Nazis. But everybody saw that they were very, good dogs.
Von Stiepenitz. How German?
But replace. Well, German Shepherds are still very good for war, but when you look at and they have the qualities of a war dog. That's why they use them in war. Or Mastiffs were bred for that originally. There's a number of dogs that are bred
I don't know,
for
man.
loyalty.
Mastiffs were hunting dogs, right? Actually, they existed at least during the Middle Ages, and they were primarily used as hunting dogs.
Well, they came.
No, I don't know nothing about Mastiff, so I'm not going to say nothing.
The Romans used them in war. It goes back.
Oh yeah, I mean, you use anything in war that.
Oh man, now I'm gonna have to read about the Mastiff.
I mean, when do you run into the battle chihuahuas? I mean, you'll be.
We load them in catapults, you see, and we fling them at people, and then they're just all so confuzzled by all these small rat-like things that they're not sure they're dogs.
Okay.
The Queen's
at their
corgis.
heels.
Yeah, the Queen's corgis are supposed to be very nasty. So there you go.
This one keeps asking if we want Taco Bell.
Sorry, Vladimir, we're probably pretty loopy over here in the States.
That's okay.
Yeah.
No worry.
When there's a thunderstorm, my wife's cat runs and hides under the bed. I interpret that kind of response as fear. And Craig, you're right. He's descended from a long line of cats who were afraid of thunderstorms or loud noises or something, But I need your all's help to figure out what kind of behavior exhibited by animals could be called courage rather than aggression.
Well, I mean, the dogs that are trained and deployed in military will do things like take bullets for their human companion and stuff like that. I mean, I consider that to be an extremely courageous act on behalf of the dog in order to do so. But of course, they've been A, trained to do that, but B, who have that, genuine affection, I think, for their human handler, that they're willing to sacrifice themselves for their person, and vice versa. There are stories of people who sacrifice themselves for their animal that way.
Only if they knew that they would die.
Why do they have to know that they will die? Why isn't just facing the risk, the possibility sufficient?
I'm trying to figure out how one would you could interpret a sacrifice as courageous if you did not know that you were going to die.
Okay, so you're basically saying the dog may have no comprehension of death, and therefore its act, it may not know the consequences, and therefore it couldn't be courageous, or you may be positing that. My understanding, David?
No, I'm not saying that it couldn't be courageous. I'm asking for an example of courage that cannot be interpreted as aggression or training.
For
on the
example,
part of an animal.
I guess
what about just, sorry.
Yeah, I guess I have an answer. Like a female animal protecting her offspring may be considered courageous when there's a danger, and she just, protects her children.
Welcome, Michael just joined us. Welcome. We're talking about courage, Michael, and dogs. But mostly
animals be courageous. Is the
what?
Hello.
Can animals be courageous? That's kind of the question, right?
Well, we came around to that question.
We're
It wasn't where we started.
We're trying to discern things.
Merry-go-round was going when you got on it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Aristotle said animals can't be courageous, as he deemed humans to have a rational soul. He didn't deem animals to have the rational soul. That was only solely of the man.
Well,
courage.
I think that animals can
I-
be
I-
courageous. I think that's what my point was, that they can be courageous in the sense that you have dogs that will react to danger in a way that they face danger, and then you have, dogs that will react to danger in a way that they run away from danger, and that
Mm.
in that tells us a little bit about, courageous behavior and cowardly behavior. That's why, by the way, I just read about mastiffs, Craig, and yeah, they were used by the Romans as guard dogs and war dogs, and you can't use a cowardly dog for war or to guard a house, right, or to guard anything, right? So there is that, the same thing with the soldier, right? I think there's a very similar element there. I think when we talk about courage, that is what we're talking about to a great degree. It's how you respond to danger.
Also, an interesting question would be about the connection between courage and imagination, because most of the time we fear, like fears aren't real. We are exposed to some situation, but we try to make up like its outcomes, and most of the time it's just our imagination. And if you like kind of control your imagination, if you don't allow your mind venture into like many different negative outcomes, it seems to be like, you may become more courageous just in your playing in your imaginations, or not allowing your mind to make tricks on your imagination.
Well, the dumber
See,
someone is, the easier it is to be courageous. So is that what you mean, that the more intelligent or the more imaginative you are, the harder it is to be courageous, because you can see all the possible outcomes?
Yeah, but in the same way you may control it, so it's kind of mind control. So you learn to control your mind in order to stay at, like, for example, if there's a war, you don't think about like your death. You may imagine it first, like say, okay, this is the worst outcome, I might die, like to be prepared. But then you don't think about this all the time, so you just go into war with uh, kind of with intention to win and think about victory, not about defeat. And now we live in time when people usually think about like bad situations, about bad outcomes, and it's very hard to focus because we're exposed to this information. Like in youth, we're more likely to watch something that is negative, and most of the time there are cases of negative situations presented, like some terrorism, airplane crashes, whatever, and people are looking for information which are negative because it catches attention way like better than information that is positive. Nobody likes to watch some positive news all the time. And so your imagination is kind of like is always exposed to this negative information, and you get more and more fears. But if you learn to control your imagination, it seems that you kind of protected from all these media sources which constantly make you fearful and whatever. I just get lost.
No,
Vladimir,
I
oh,
understand what you mean.
I was going to ask Vladimir, do you ever read horror novels or watch horror movies?
Well, when I was a kid, yeah, I was afraid of watching horror
Yeah,
movies.
they scare you. Woo.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, though, I read tons of horror. I love it. It's my favorite genre.
Mhm.
I've even wrote a couple horror novellas. But the thing is, after you watch these things and you go through them, even though you haven't actually gone through them or they haven't exactly coincided with reality, a lot of times you find yourself able to almost face similar situations, analogous situations, you may say, in similar contexts, with a
Mhm.
newfound courage because you're like, oh, I've already gone through this, and I can now take this. I couldn't take it before. But if, for say, you were to avoid it in the
Mhm.
first circumstance, just flat out avoid it because you were saying, no, I'm not going to let this affect me or anything, so I'm just going to avoid it, then I feel it would be detrimental to the development of your courage, or potentially. It wouldn't absolutely be, it'd just be potentially. I don't know. It just kind of sounds like the old, you may not be phrasing it this way, but I just kind of hear almost the old Platonic argument of, we shouldn't go to the theater and watch these people's actings because it would give us our imagination's flight into the wrong areas. And I would say, nah, go imagine away. Just, when shit hits the fan, actually do what you know what's to do. You should be able to separate these two. So, I don't know. Hold on, I need more drink.
So how valuable, since you're proposing the topic, Vladimir, this must be somewhat important for you, to at least to some degree. Like how valuable do you think courage is for us as people? Is it still very important? Like,
Yeah, I think, to be honest, when I started thinking about courage this week, I realized that I never seriously thought about it before. And it was kind of, kind of insight for me. I was, wow, it's so interesting. I was studying philosophy. I was reading lots of books, like tons of books and philosophical books. And I never paid attention to this particular theme. And well, the first day, as I said, I was trying on Monday, I tried to focus my attention and just came up with some questions. And this was actually one of my questions, like, what's the value for everybody courage has? And I think, like, it's very interesting to think about it in terms of trying to achieve this virtue, to become courageous. And in terms of value, well, I would rank it very high, and it may just even make a meaning of life for you, just pursuing courage and trying to be. And it's not, again, it's not about fighting some battles. It's about like daily situations where you must live, as Craig said, like waking up every morning, maybe also an act of courage. And so there are lots of situations where there's just, and moral courage, I guess, is important here as well. So you think, like, there are all sorts of like depression or all sorts of negative emotions, and by being courageous, you may overcome them and just go on and continue, in spite of your fears and whatever.
why is it so you're saying that you do think that it's important, so why do you think that's important? Or if someone else wants to argue the opposite point, that it is not that important, why is it not that
I
important?
would argue that it is.
Okay, but why?
It doesn't matter, it is.
Why do
I
you,
mean, I think there's just lots of situations in life where you have to stand up to someone. Sometimes it's even like, for example, a whistleblower. Let's say you're in government and you see someone doing something corrupt. I don't know, you see like bribery or something, and you report it, and you know that it might backfire against you, and that you might get fired for reporting it or whatever. And that's not even just in government, in jobs and business in general. Often you're taking a big risk whenever you stand up and try to do the right thing. So I guess it's important for that reason.
it's
Yeah,
important because it advances society? Was
Yeah.
that the intent of your answer? Okay.
Advances society, and it can be better for you, although sometimes it is a risk you're taking that might backfire. But yeah. But if no one stood up when they saw corruption would get out of control, and it would just happen everywhere. So you have to have people willing to do it.
So it's kind of a very important thing for society as a whole.
Yeah,
but it's also important thing for you because it makes you emotionally rich, and if you practice, like if you try to develop courage, it makes you feel certain emotions which you are not able when if you do not practice it. So I mean, when you just work on it constantly, developing your courage, you become more reliant, and it just boosts your self-esteem, and you just, again, it makes you feel better.
I love that. Yeah, no, I love that point about it boosts your self-esteem, because it's like when you see something wrong happen and you speak out, it brings a sort of level of clarity to your own beliefs. It's like you're not you're no longer like an actor in a show. Like you're
Yeah.
really speaking what you truly believe, and it helps bring a level of clarity. But yeah, it's
Yes,
very
also-
psychological.
I guess it also increases your serotonin level in brain, so you become just more confident, and life just gets way better than.
So
when
I'm
you're-
kind of wanting to wait for David to get back here, but there's two obvious, relatively recent concrete examples that we can discuss, and those would be Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. Where would we put them on our courage versus otherwise spectrum, do you
Cowardice.
think?
I don't know much about Julian Assange. I mean, I know some things, but I'm not really sure if I can, like, I don't understand the situation maybe well enough to say if it's courageous or not. I think Edward Snowden, I mean, that was definitely courage, you know, like he purposefully, you know, did something that was quite dangerous for himself. I don't know if he was worried about getting killed, probably not, but he could, you know, have been locked up for life, you know. So
Well, I mean, he was charged with espionage, and there still is, I believe, a death penalty associated with that if it's
yeah, that's maybe
know,
there was a chance.
definitely
Yeah.
great.
But in any case, I mean, getting locked up for life or getting locked up for a long, long time, I mean, that's, you know, that's a very scary prospect, I would say. So I mean, I don't really like, you can say that he did the wrong thing. Like you could make that argument saying that some people do. I don't, but some people do. But I don't think you can make the argument that the act itself wasn't brave.
I think you say if he thought it was the right thing, then that's what you should base courage on, not on whether or not it's actually the right thing. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. You just put it better than I did, but yeah, that's what I meant.
Yep, no, well, sounds right to me. But
I mean, in terms of Julian Assange, I honestly, I mean, I know it's a similar case, but I'm not really like that clear on the specifics. So
Yes, I mean, speaking out against, if you see something wrong, it's often very scary to speak out against it. I've seen situations at work where like a whole bunch of people saw something going wrong and they were all afraid to say anything. You know, it happens all the time, in my opinion.
yeah, it also, yeah, it does happen all the time. And look at, imagine like the amount of people in the NSA. Was it I think it was the NSA that he worked for. There's, you know, imagine how many people thought what he thought, you know, probably a good amount of people, and you know, nobody did that. I mean, that was a risky thing to do, you know. It takes balls to do something like that, you know. Yeah,
David, we're talking about Snowden.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's so yeah, I think yeah, it's that ability, right? That ability to advance, yeah, to advance to charge when you're scared of getting killed, you know. It's you have to overcome that fear, and then yeah, I mean, that's what courage is. But I agree with you, Vladimir, because you raised a very important point, or I mean, on, you know, interesting point, at least to me. I thought that was a very interesting remark, that it makes you feel better, right? Like when you're courageous. And I don't know, like that's a very interesting point. I don't know if that's a biological thing or not, like if it's that evolutionary thing, but people feel a lot better when they're courageous than when they're cowardly. It just feels better. And it's interesting to think. I haven't really thought about that. I'm not really sure why, but it's, you know, certainly true, at least in my case. But
It's just
a
an
lot.
argument, an argument to, you know, you ask about the value of courage, and when you think about it from this perspective, it seems that the value of it increases.
Why do you guys think that is? Why does it feel so much better to be courageous than to be cowardly?
Well, I mean, we're primates, right? Look at the gorillas, right? It's the big old silverback gets all the girls. Oh, I mean, there is a certain biological thing there that's going on, I suspect. And
mean,
shows
it
its
really
way
is-
difference in males and females.
And
True,
let's
there
be
is a
clear,
difference.
it only feels good if you don't end up being totally destroyed by what you did.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't feel good 100% of the time. Like if I don't know if you're
And if
living
you
a
if you are
dictatorship,
totally destroyed, you don't feel anything.
Yeah, and also if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
cowardly, if you're cowardly and you get totally, screwed, which is, what you're saying. I mean, it doesn't feel that good either.
If you're cowardly and you manage to avoid it because you were cowardly, you might be like, oh, well, I guess I'm just a cowardly lion then.
It still feels icky though.
Yeah, it could.
It always feels icky.
Yeah.
yeah.
Like I think that confirms Vladimir's point. Like it doesn't feel good. Like maybe you survive, but it doesn't feel good. Whereas like when you're courageous, it feels good. You get that, that rush. And I think maybe that's a primate thing, like you're saying, Craig. I don't know.
Well, to Craig's point, if you think about it, everything that human beings has accomplished, fire, language, electricity, spaceships, the internet, we've accomplished all of that, and our genetic code is only 2% different than a chimpanzee.
The key 2%.
So we've
big
accomplished
2%.
all of that with the 2% because the chimpanzee has accomplished none of it. They're smart, they're very smart, but not like human beings.
Well, but there's a whole cultural evolution thing that's gone on with humans that have not gone on with other animals, and that's really been the difference maker. I think. I don't think it's actually been a physical genetic difference that caused it. It was the monolith basically when the monolith came and changed us so that we learned to take bones to beat each other over the heads.
I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying.
Sure. Good luck.
You're not saying, hopefully, that there's no genetic difference between a human being and a chimpanzee.
No, of course not. But I'm saying that difference is probably not the main driver of the thing. It's that we invented culture, and that was an exponential, explosive thing that caused us to take off versus other kinds of critters.
Well,
and then we got strong enough that we killed off the competitors.
Yeah.
After we bred with some of them, but then we killed them off.
Or we adapted better than they did.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So
it's not necessarily that we killed all the species that have gone extinct. We haven't done that.
No, but I'm thinking like the Denisovans and the Neanderthals and things like that. We know that we have parts of their genes in ours, but they're not around anymore. And to a certain extent, that's because Homo sapiens killed them off.
I mean, I think that's to a big extent, isn't it? Like Neanderthals, I think that's the main, isn't it the main reason?
I mean, I don't think anybody actually knows for sure, but I think that's a current popular theory, right?
I think
killed them off and stole some of their genes.
No. There was intermarriage or
They're Levi's. No.
Or whatever you want to call it.
I think screwing is the term that you're trying to avoid using,
and probably non-consensual.
More vulgar term than that. But
probably non-consensual.
Interbreeding.
Yeah, interbreeding is,
Yeah,
I don't think there was much marriage at all.
yeah.
Um, but
So, s-
yeah, sorry.
oh no. So what kind of questions were we thinking about courage? Why is it important? Like, do we have any other, what was our original train of thought on it?
Well, actually, now that we've kind of like tackled if it's important or not, I think one, well, at least to me, one interesting thing is how courage as a value is core in certain cultures and not, and it's not a core value in other cultures. And I think that that little thing, you know, how important courage is to people, I think it changes things substantially. Like it's one of the, I would argue that it's really one of the core values that impacts moral codes the most and makes for a bigger difference. For example, you know, if you look at, for example, the Japanese, right? I mean, courage is really a central value in Japanese culture, you know, especially before the modern time, you know, the whole samurai culture.
Honor, courage. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was a
Bushido.
very key value in their moral code. Um, but perhaps a more important distinction, and this is something that philosophers have covered quite a bit in the West. I mean, especially Nietzsche, the transition between the Greco-Roman, you know, the classical value system where courage, you know, is very central as well. Perhaps not as central as in the Japanese code, but pretty central nevertheless. And then the transition to Christianity, where courage really takes a back seat. You know, it's still there, especially if you're a Knight Templar or something like that. But you know, it's courage really, you know, took a dive there, and you know,
So
you get values like humility, right?
let me run something else by you guys, because we've been primarily talking about courage basically in the context of various kinds of virtue ethics systems. What if you're a utilitarian? How does courage fit in, do we think, into a utilitarian framework? Or
Yeah, I
does it?
mean, you're helping society. Like let's say you see corruption and you speak out against it, or you're a whistleblower or whatever. I mean, that would be utilitarian, right? Because you're trying to prevent it from happening going forward, and you're trying to, I
If
guess,
it's for the greatest good, yes, it would be utilitarian. Of course, if
yeah,
it was
if it was,
not, then it would not be utilitarian.
yeah,
Well, utilitarian systems don't value values in themselves. I don't think. You know what they value is the end, right? Uh, the
Consequences.
really the end is what, the end result is what matters, right? I mean, because if you're utilitarian, well, at least this strict utilitarianism, right? You get those examples of, yeah, you would kill one person in order to, you know, to save 100 and all that. I mean, it's not, it's really just about the end result. It's not how you achieve that end result. You look at, you know, Aristotle or Plato, they're talking about a very different thing, right? They're talking about value systems based on a classical conception of things, which value something like courage as a moral good. You know, it has value in itself.
Intrinsic value. Right?
Yeah, it has, exactly. It has intrinsic value. So, you know, that,
But it also may be interesting from utilitarian perspective, just to unite people around this virtue. So it helps society to stay closer, to stay connected, and it's like basically helps to develop all. You know, what is the, you Bruno said like utilitarian, there's an end result, it's focused on end result, but what kind of result? Like it's is it clear that utilitarian strive for something special, like, you know, technology, increase in population, in welfare? Like what exactly is it?
Well, and that's right. A constant debate is when we talk about getting the greatest good for the greatest number of people. What the hell does that even mean? And how do we know if we've done it or not? And
Yeah.
so it is a big bugaboo with utilitarianism, is that how do you actually tell if you're doing the right thing or not? I mean, it kind of boils down to the classic, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one conundrum. Which is often true, but not always.
Welcome.
Yeah, in the same case, you may aim just achieving like kind of collective courage and like being decent society where everybody feels himself belonging to the society, and nobody has some fears and some uncertainties about their lives. Also, maybe like an end result.
Are you guys familiar with the study that was done of the trolley problem? Does that ring any
Yeah,
bells?
that's.
Oh, yeah.
There's actually a show called The Good Place where they, which is I really recommend it. It's really funny. It's a sitcom or a comedy show that is very philosophical, has a very philosophical bent to it.
You know, I only watched a couple episodes of that, but it seemed to me like the thrust of it was, let's point out the absurdity of an idea by using it.
Let's play now. I would have to
Are you
think
talking
about
about a
that,
good
but
place or the trolley problem?
But they
Good place.
reenact the trolley problem. That's why I was talking
Oh,
about
okay.
it. There's an episode
Okay.
which is actually, I think, called the trolley problem. If I'm not
Well,
mistaken, it's about that, and they show
I
it.
guess
It's very gruesome.
I guess what you know, we're talking about utilitarianism and so forth. As I understand the study that was conducted around the trolley problem, uh, a person is standing on a platform and a trolley is coming, and they can throw a switch, and on one track is one workman working on the track, and on the other are 5 workmen.
Yeah.
And so the question, if you don't do anything, the train is going to kill the 5 people. But if you throw the switch, you're going to kill 1, a net gain of 4.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the people who were asked this question said that they would throw the switch. Now, then they were asked another question. They said that you're standing on a platform overlooking the track, and there is a suitably overweight person in front of you, that if you pushed him off, you're going to divert the train, so it's only going to kill the 1 person instead of the 5 workmen. And most of the people would not push the guy off. So from a utilitarian perspective, the end result was the same, but most people would not push the guy off.
Yeah, and there's another scenario that my philosophy professor brought up related to that one, which is suppose you have, so this is all hypothetical, so it would never happen, but suppose you have 5 people that need an organ transplant, and if they get that organ transplant, they will be fully back to normal health. Of course, that's never actually the case, but hypothetically, let's make that assumption that once they get that organ transplant, they're fully healthy again. So you have 2 options. Either those 5 people are gonna die because they can't get the organ transplant in time, or you could take a totally healthy person, kill that person, and give their organs to each of the 5 people. Should you do it?
Go on right ahead, do it.
These are Sashir and Jess.
Kind of changes the flavor of waiting in the doctor's office.
We're talking about courage, but now we're kind of like talking about the trolley problem. We got distracted. You guys know the drill.
How did the trolleys get in the doctor's office? What is the scenario here?
We're doing the organ harvest.
There are several, but Michael, can you repeat that? Because Michael just gave us a more extreme one. I kind of like that one better because it's so extreme.
Yeah. So there's 5 people waiting for an organ transplant, and they're not going to get it in time, so they're about to die because they're not getting the organ transplant in time, right? But we're assuming hypothetically that if they did get an organ transplant, then they'd be fully back to normal health, right?
100%.
100%. So then the question is, should you take a perfectly healthy person, kill that person, and then transplant all their organs to those 5 people, and bring them back to health fully? Should you do that from a utilitarian perspective? Most people, I think, would say no, but then the question is, why not?
Well, the
Yeah.
answer is easily no, because the Hippocratic Oath would prevent you from killing a healthy person, even if the end result is you're saving 5 other people.
But is the
That also
Hippocratic
assumes
Oath
that we're a doctor and that the Hippocratic Oath pertains to this hypothetical, which we're not even sure because we're already talking about 5 people or 4 people that could be brought back to full health with an organ harvest, which, that doesn't exist. And right, so this is all,
Let's say
It's
you're not a
probably
doctor.
problems.
Let's say you're not a doctor.
Oh, that's-
Okay.
That's not a hypothetical. I mean, there's a lot of people on the.
well,
organ
then those
transplant
4 people could all have been past criminals, so killing the 1 person for them wouldn't be good.
That
And
makes
then we would have to say, well, all those 4 people aren't past criminals. And then I could say, okay, well, that 1 person could also be a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and me killing them could bring less. And then
That
you
makes
would
it.
say, oh,
That makes.
And then if you drop the normal brain and you instead take the one that's from the abnormal container, then you're going to be in real big trouble.
And let me just add, if you're not a doctor, you shouldn't be doing transplants.
Well, but maybe you're.
let's say hypothetically, I could do it.
Maybe you're the
But is the-
director, though.
Give
But is the
Frank like
Hippocratic
1 or
Oath-
2 tries.
I mean, the Hippocratic Oath is kind of like a generalization, right? So like utilitarianism, like says you should account for any exception if that is a reliable exception. Basically, like an oath is just an approximation to good behavior. Like I don't think you could make an oath that's like utilitarian in every conceivable circumstance, I guess.
Well,
it-
but
Not
that's
really.
the point of it. It's basically provides, it takes an individual morality out of it. That's nature. It's basically, it is a legal requirement, actually, in
Okay, but
terms of doctors.
let's just say there's no oath. Okay, I mean it's a very hypothetical example. I think look Michael. So if you're a utilitarian, right? I think that's a very good example because if you're a utilitarian, you got to say let's just kill this guy and let's save 5 people. I mean it's not that complicated, right? That's utilitarianism.
There's a social problem with this, even if it works that, we want to save 5 people. 5 people are more beneficial than 1 person.
I'm just
I
saying
don't-
if you're a utilitarian here, like if you're a pure utilitarian, that would be the answer.
Well, if you're
As a-
pure utilitarian, then you'd need to calculate the relative values of each of the 5 people versus the relative
Hold
value
on.
of the 1 person. Because if
Hold
the
on,
one-
why don't you
the one-
just kill yourself and give your organs if you're so ready to kill
that's
somebody
not-
else?
There you go.
That's not
Yeah.
the
that
question.
There,
works.
problem solved.
Because
You
that's not the
could.
question.
So that Frank brings up a good point, which is even if you are a utilitarian, how much would you want to be in a society where you might be the one who needs to, furnish organs for 5 other people? I don't think anybody would participate in a society like that.
Yeah, I did just bring up the categorical imperative. Aha! Take that, utilitarians.
Well, but this isn't so much of a hypothetical. Again, we could go right down to HCMC and there are people sitting there needing organs right now. But you have to also consider, I mean, there's a reason why it's considered unethical and illegal. Basically, it's subject to international law that you can't be executing prisoners and harvesting their organs either.
Well, so
I
there's-
understand what you're saying, Shashir, but we're trying, as I understand what we're trying to do, we're trying to develop the principles that inform lawmaking. And maybe the laws already exist, but that doesn't mean we don't need to step back and figure out how is this done? What is a good reason behind it?
If
Oh, but-
I may step in here, the whole point of trolley problems or the organ problem that Michael has posed to us is supposed to be moral introspection, evaluating, kind of what Vladimir brought up in the beginning that people weren't doing on the whole, is evaluating your values, how they would be in a possible situation, and what would your actions be in a possible hypothetical situation. So as these can, as Shashir pointed out, and do in some cases pertain to the world that we live in, the real output of any of this is really just understanding your own justifications for any actions you may take or values you may hold. That thing that David talked about earlier, and then Michael brought it up again. But okay, I'm done.
Well, the argument for the laws and oaths and other ethical guidelines is really to kind of take it out of an individual's subjective morality. It's basically, if you agree to the laws of that society, then therefore you're essentially following the wisdom of the society, rather than saying this particular situation, I'm going to decide, well, I'm going to kill this one person because I can save 5 other people. I
But
mean,
maybe the oaths should be, don't harm an individual except in the case where it can save 5 people. Like maybe you should make that exception. Maybe that exception should be baked into the oath.
Or maybe that law could exist. People observe this instance happening and eventually think, maybe we should rewrite it or amend it to make it say, well, in this
I hope
situation.
none of you guys become doctors. If you do, I am not coming to see you.
I'll be
question.
beside your bed and slowly pull down the mask as you're laying there and just smiling.
The more interesting case for me is actually the one where someone decides it's okay to kill 5 people to save 1. And if we think that doesn't happen, we'll go back to our battlefield examples, where I suspect you'll see that sort of thinking occasionally happens.
The atomic bomb is one example, but yeah, I mean, that
Yeah, sure.
probably happens every day. If we're talking about World War II, that they probably had to make that.
You don't have to go that far back, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, any big war.
well, it's almost any military action. I mean, you're bound to get a bunch of civilians killed. I mean, there's no such thing as a truly precise bomb.
Yeah, you gotta calculate lives at the end of the day.
I mean, this would go to just war theory.
Yeah. But so, in that trolley problem, yeah, if you're a true utilitarian, you got to choose, you're going to save the 5 people. But yeah, like people are highlighting with the other example. I mean, there's some problems there with utilitarianism.
Like, point out a difference between what Michael outlined versus the trolley problem. The trolley problem basically starts that somebody's going to die. It's basically a choice of whether one person or that person is going to die. Now, in the situation between the necessarily is in the Michael's the transplant situation is, yes, 5 people are potentially going to die if no action is taken. But basically, you end up having to take an action. That's why the do no harm principle, the Hippocratic Oath, is that you have somebody who's healthy right there.
Oh, but could we
nothing's
also
necessarily gonna happen
potentially
to-
say I don't take any action in Michael's situation? That I do nothing?
Well, no, I'd have to basically take an active action to kill the person to harvest their organs.
Michael, was it phrased in an exclusive or is this a false dilemma? Please clarify.
I'm pretty sure the ethical action that one might take in that situation is to ask for volunteers.
So I don't know, like, I guess, what do you mean exclusive or? So it was, should you do it? Should you
Either
kill the
or.
person?
You either do it or you don't do it. And
That's- Yeah,
No
that's what I
other
thought.
situation apply. Okay.
Either you do it or you don't do it is what I thought. But yeah, is there a
Okay.
third option?
Of course, there's third option. There's a huge amount of options. You
Yeah.
could go crazy of options.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it just matters if you're saying we can only take two choices.
Let's backtrack a little bit. Why were we talking about the trolley problem in relation to courage? What was the connection? Was it the utilitarianism thing?
If
I
it
guess
was more than 3 minutes ago, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have that problem.
Oh, you talked about the guy, I forgot, like in one situation, they would switch the train to kill one instead of five, but in another, they wouldn't. What was the other situation?
I think
They push someone over on the other side to divert it over into the one person who died, in which case the net would, well, it wouldn't be the same. It'd actually be 2 versus 4, but that
And
was
the
the
thing-
gist.
The thing that I was trying to communicate was not what was the moral thing to do. The thing that I was trying to communicate is how most people overwhelmingly responded.
Yeah.
Most people overwhelmingly responded that they would pull the switch, but most people overwhelmingly responded that they would not push the fat guy.
Is it
So-
important that he's fat? Did they have to actually add that? It seems arbitrary. Just kind of mean.
There's
Yeah.
actually a book.
Is
that
it
was
mean of me
written
to
about
use the
that
word
called
fat?
Should I Kill the Fat Man?
Well, maybe
Oh.
the idea is, I thought the idea is that since he was heavier, he would stop the train for like
Okay.
a really skinny person, it would run right over me, like
It
me.
just kind of feels, it felt kind of like an afterthought. Like, are you going to push this guy? Oh, by the way, he's fat. What the hell would that have to be brought into it?
Well,
You know?
It's
David.
body shaming.
So David, I would kind of answer the same way. So I do understand why people would answer in that way, you know, because I think the difference is that in one case he's gonna die anyways, you know, or I mean not that he's gonna die anyways, but basically you have like what 6 people in front of you and people are gonna die, you know, that's it, you know. But in the other case, you know, the poor fat guy, he's not in the action, right? Like you're bringing yourself and the fat guy into the action, you know, by, you know, because you've decided to do that. But you know, he's a spectator, he's innocent. I think that's kind of like the difference. I don't know how valid of a
So
of
one
term
person
that is, but I think
speculated that-
that's why people answer it differently.
one person speculated that the differences in the answers had to do with actually touching a person as opposed to touching a piece of equipment. I don't know. I mean,
There actually
it
a
doesn't
video.
have make any difference with regard to utilitarianism, but it's a question.
There's actually a video on YouTube. It's on Vsauce channel. I don't know even if you are guys familiar with that channel. They conducted an experiment. So they created this situation where people had to push the button, and it was
Oh.
about like train going in one or another direction. And then they asked people why they decided to choose one or another response. Well, I don't know. I watched this video long time ago, but it's still there. So if you are interested in this, like how people will say, what will they say? It's like you may just watch the video, and there most of the time, like there are differences. So some people just push the button and they save one guy instead of 5, and some people don't react. And most of them, I guess, they didn't react at all. They didn't do anything. They just it's like they freeze. So it's like the reaction was like freezing and being completely like inactive. I don't know.
I think that's a good that's interesting as well, because you know, I think that's maybe how most people would react, you know, in real life. Yeah, I mean, flipping that switch would probably be very difficult, you know, because you're killing someone. So you just let it go. I think that's probably how most people would react.
Yeah, and then it's I remember it was kind of interesting to listen how people justified their like that they didn't take any action. So they just were saying like, you know, I couldn't understand what was going on. I couldn't come up with any like any response.
Which is, of course, in some ways analogous to the famous Kitty Genovese case where the woman was basically murdered in front of a bunch of people who did nothing
Mhm.
to assist or to summon help. And I have no idea how the court case wound up, how culpable they were held for that. I believe in general they were held as not culpable for it because they didn't do anything.
Sounds
And
very similar
it's
to
an
the last
interesting
episode of
peculiarity in the
Seinfeld.
American legal system, I think, and maybe in Western legal systems in general, is that you're often legally better off not helping. And that's a very weird concept for me, but it seems to be part of the system.
That varies. There actually are now duty to intervene laws that says if you can act without, the argument is without putting yourself at risk, yes, you do have a duty to intervene. So I like saying if I see somebody choking,
Right.
Yeah.
I should do the Heimlich maneuver on him.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah, going back to the trolley problem though. Dang, I already forgot what I was gonna say. Yeah, so I think a lot of it might be if you push the fat guy, let's say, in that specific situation, from a utilitarian perspective, that might be the thing to do. However, the problem is there's kind of a fear that we might generalize that to other situations where it shouldn't apply. Like then all of a sudden people might start making arguments. Well, what about here? Should I tell this person to save five people? What about here? Well, what about here? And they might distort it to situations that don't actually save 5 people or whatever. Whereas when you're pressing the switch on the train, it's less, there's less of a likelihood that would be generalized to cases where it's not actually applicable, I guess. Yeah.
It could be though.
In terms of pushing the fat guy, that is like the Hippocratic Oath. It's basically, I'm taking a direct action. Now, pushing the switch, yes, but that might presume that my job at that point, because I have access to that switch, is to be the brake man about it. I mean, either way, you're making a choice, but one is more direct action in terms of that. The fat guy is just there. He's not working on the railroad. He's basically just standing there. So it'd be the same as if I'm a doctor and I kill somebody and harvest their organs. Well, not necessarily saying that person getting their organs harvested was in a position to say, well, hey, this could be a risk. I could get my organ harvested. I mean, these rules go to, let's say if I have a loved one and I know that Frank is a compatible organ donor, I have a loved one dying of heart failure. Can I then just kill Frank and say, well, we're taking Frank's heart and to save my loved one?
Go ahead. It's brought me nothing but pain.
Oh dear. So you'll probably hate me for this one, but I have another utilitarian concept of the trolley problem, and it involves, my dear friends, the American legal system, is that, if the 5 people get killed, the class action lawsuit against the trolley company is probably going to yield a whole lot more money to a whole lot more people than if just one person gets killed. So in a strictly utilitarian sense, I will actually provide greater benefit to a larger number of people by letting the 5 die than by letting the 1 die. What do you think of them apples?
Well, that's kind of the problem with all utilitarian, with the trolley problems, that they get to a point where we abstract far enough out with our hypotheticals that they become absurd. It's like, yeah, and what if, those 5 people's families that I just gave money were all Nazis? It could happen.
Which is why Philippa Foot, who invented the trolley problem, grew to absolutely hate it.
Yes.
In her life, she absolutely said, "This is a stupid thing. Quit bringing it up."
Actually, Craig, I'd argue the other way. That's not if the 5 people collect more money, that technically puts the trolley company more at risk, potentially puts them out. So then you end up having more unemployed people working for the trolley company. the foundation of kind of these civil laws and why we have punitive damages and stuff is actually to minimize the amount of risk. So the ideal is that companies act in ways that minimize risk so that they don't get sued more or they don't suffer more penalties or things like that. So I think the utilitarian option, if it was just purely monetary, would still be switch the train to the one workman. Because yes, that workman's family might sue you, but they're going to sue you for a lot less and the trolley company might survive.
I, of course, being an engineer, would say build trolleys that have brakes on them to begin with. But
I actually think it takes us all the way back around to Vladimir's original question about courage. Because to me, if you are a utilitarian, throwing the switch to kill one person instead of 5, or whatever, might be a brave, courageous thing to do, even though one knows you might be sued.
Can I posit a thought experiment while we're on them?
Go ahead.
I do. Okay. So one I know, and my favorite one with these moral quandaries is it goes like this. There's this guy named Jeff, right? And Jeff is about to, where he lives, there's currently a great war going on, okay? And he also, at the same time, however, has a sick mother, okay? Should Jeff go off and fight in that war, or should he stay home and take care of his sick mother? If he goes and fights in the war, he'll be able to make a much bigger difference for much more people. But if he stays home and helps his sick mother, he would be able to make such a huge difference for one person that may be more significant. What
Frank, is
would
this
be
your own unique example?
No, this is Sartre.
You know, I actually watched a movie. Well, maybe it'll overcomplicate things, but I don't know if you guys have seen The Free State of Jones, which is a pretty great movie, by the way. It's about the American Civil War. I don't know. Have you guys seen that movie? It kind of presents a similar scenario in the beginning of the movie.
I saw it. It didn't make much of an impression on me, but
Is there a Sartre figure in there?
Is there what?
The whole question, well, the thing is, you have people, they mule over and they go, oh, he should go to war because it's his duty, or, oh, he should stay home for his family because family is the duty, or, oh, you have the utilitarian saying, you should be doing the greatest amount for the most people. And then you have the deontologist talking about, oh, you should be doing to the one person because he wouldn't want somebody, universally acting on the things outwards of him. But the important part that Sartre points out when he goes with is whatever choice he makes, it doesn't matter. What matters is that Jeff takes the choice and follows on the good ends that he can identify and justify and be authentic to. Is the whole point of it. So I don't know. I'm circling back to the thing I've been saying this whole time. It's the only way to adapt trolley problems. Be authentic, dumbasses. I don't know. It's Sartre. I'm sorry about dumbasses.
All right, you got Sartre. I got Jim Kirk. I don't believe in the no-win scenario, so I think the trolley problem in and of itself is I reject it on that basis.
Yeah, you could take that too.
I would agree that it's kind of
justification.
But
it's
sometimes
kind of a bad test of utilitarianism. I would agree with that.
sometimes it's the reality that you got to make these choices, though. I mean, it kind of sucks, but
all the time.
In real life, I mean, it does have, like in war. I mean, you said it yourself, Craig, right? Like in war, these are real tests.
Actually, the trolley problem comes up in real life because just a few years ago, there was there was flooding in the middle of the United States, and the Obama administration diverted the flood so that it would only impact one town instead of 3. So that's the trolley problem.
Yeah, like with
Well,
COVID.
it shifts the level of the scope of the actor. It shifts the actor from like just a random individual to the state, which makes it completely different.
I mean, the COVID situation has kind of like created, you know, a number of situations like this where they have to decide, you know, who lives and who dies, you know, and it's a utilitarian question, you know, how are we going to make the most out of it? You know, how are we going to benefit the most people in the most meaningful way?
I think if you're a state or you're like an authoritarian, maybe it makes sense to be utilitarian. Because I mean, what good is a state if you're not trying to keep as many people as possible alive in it? But if you're an individual, it doesn't make as much sense. And I think it's pretty common that people who act in a utilitarian sense are being antisocial and generally selfish, whereas people who are being pro-social are kind of doing the opposite of utilitarianism.
Well, I was gonna say there's triage, which is there's rules for triage, about how you determine who you're going to give medical aid to.
Yeah. I mean,
There's that.
there's normal triage, and then you have situations of triage where you just have to decide who lives and who dies, and you know.
Well, I mean so we're talking about like allocation of resources for medicine where like you don't have enough time or surgeons to help everybody, and then you have like damage mitigation by like a state, and then you have like, you know, what are our like personal obligations if, you know, we could say 5 people or not. I think to like use a war analogy, if you have a bunch of soldiers and they're very if they're all trying to do the greatest thing for their army or their nation or whatever, imagine somebody tosses a grenade and every soldier thinks, I'll be the one to jump on the grenade, save the troop, but then they all jump on the grenade. That doesn't work.
It wouldn't happen either.
And what if every one of them thinks, oh, the guy next to me will jump on the grenade?
Well,
No one jumps on the grenade. They all blow up.
You need to roll a dice before the whole war begins, and based on that, determine who will be the grenade jumper.
But can you
Rather
trust
than
that
the
person
game
who's
theory thing
designated
now?
as the grenade
Prisoner's
person?
dilemma type problem.
you know, in Free State of Jones, you know, going back to that movie, because they have that exact problem that you were saying, Jesse. Actually, there's a scene which is about that. You know, it's one of the first scenes in the movie. It's them deciding who lives and who dies out of the people that are injured in the war, because it's the Civil War, and they had a system for that. Their system was the higher the rank, the higher the priority. So they wanted to save the officers first. And obviously, you know, if by the time, you know, if you're a private, you know, you wouldn't really have much of a chance of making it out alive if you're seriously injured. So, and I mean, they were being purely utilitarian, right? I mean, it's.
I think we should all get T-shirts made that say, "I'm not going to jump on the grenade."
Again, though, that's Bruno. That's utilitarianism at the level of, you know, like not the state, but you know, not the individual. It's at least one level up. So
Now,
it
would
kind
that
of
be
makes sense.
utilitarianism or would that be contractarianism? Because if you're setting up contracts with people that you trust to uphold and continue to go to their ends, is it the same as just taking a qualitative measure in a potential situation?
I don't think we have time to enter a contract with the person who threw the grenade.
No, I'm saying with the Civil War area, when they were saying, you know, if this would happen or this would happen, your priority is the officer, then, you know, the private or somebody lower. And then they're trusting the people who are going about their days to fulfill that area. We, looking back, would say it's kind of utilitarian because you're trying to do the most good. But
well, it was utilitarian for the army, because they know, you know, an officer is worth more than a private. You know, that's, you know, it's very easy to determine, you know, how much people's lives are worth if you're looking at it from purely like a military perspective. Right? It's
You
like
can't-
when you're playing chess, you know, when you're playing chess, you're totally utilitarian, right?
Oh,
And Michael
absolutely.
knows, because everybody knows, but Michael's a good.
Those are the
great
most
chess player.
beautiful. Those are the most beautiful chess games. They're the ones where you strategically sacrifice everything to
You're-
checkmate their king.
you know, and you know, unfortunately, it's almost, you know, it's not a, it's kind of a bad thing for me to be making this comparison because those were real people in the Civil War, right? But that's what they were
Yeah.
doing. They're playing chess, you know. Look, I'm not gonna give up my queen for this pawn. In the same way, I'm not gonna give up my colonel for this private, you know. So it's
Yeah, but in real life, officers are kind of more courageous than privates, and so jumping on the grenade, it's probably most likely that if you are a higher rank, you jump on the grenade and save your soldiers. And those people who are not courageous, they just will not. They will run away.
yeah. No,
I think
I was talking
there's
about
a
people.
there's a solution to the grenade thing. So we're kind of like, I think it's pretty consistent that like at the group level, it's smart to be utilitarian. At the individual level, it's not so clear. But if they're in the grenade situation, that's a Nash equilibrium situation where like everybody, if they have the same strategy, then everybody loses. So I don't know. I'm not too familiar with how to parse
I
that
mean,
one out.
couldn't you
but
just
that's
grab
where-
the person next to you and throw them on the grenade? There, person who's doing it, so.
Maybe you could with
I
your
mean-
muscles. I couldn't. I'm too.
You know,
Just grab,
you know
Right,
what?
but if you talk to people who've been soldiers, and this is something that's known about, that's really involved warriors going back to ancient days, is that generally the view, how you motivate people to fight, is not so much about ideals of nationalism or things, but basically you're just fighting for the person next to you. And the willingness to sacrifice is basically because your immediate thought is, I am defending the person next to me. And so the willingness to throw myself on the grenade is I'm trying to save it. And a big part of PTSD is survival guilt, where you get a lot of people who say, well, you know, this person in my unit died, or this person died because he saved me. And so it's almost this factor of shame that kind of fuels this, that makes soldiers willing to sacrifice themselves for their other people.
Let's bring it back to the courage thing, Vladimir. But I kind of want to touch on, you know, you gave us like that big list of topics that you discussed on your group. So I think it would be interesting to I want to ask a question that kind of like combines both topics. So courage and masculinity. And actually feminism. Let's throw like three topics. Is courage a masculine trait, or is it not? And also, if it's not a masculine trait, are there different types of courage depending on if you're a man or woman?
In Russian, the word for courage is мужество, and мужество means like manness, basically.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to be a kind of in ancient traditions, it seems to be a kind of masculine trait. But nowadays, well, it's if we're talking about moral courage, it's not about like it's following your principles and values. It's not just about men's. It's more universal. So females as well may be courageous, but it's like depends on how you differentiate between the meaning of this word.
What is our definition of courage, by the way?
Well, we stated three definitions, like the ability to do something dangerous or to face pain or opposition without showing fear. And we discussed this mediocre virtue between fear and confidence. So you have to find kind of balance and face dangerous situations without running away. But again, there is no definition. It's so complicated problem because nobody actually defines it. So we may argue about the definition of courage, and there are no consensus on what it is, because for some people, again, what you consider, if if you think that courage is one thing, some people may say, no, it's foolhardy. And if you think that courage is it's like, it may be it's very personal and subjective.
So I might push for the Webster definition of just the ability to do something that frightens you.
Sure.
Like there's pretty clear merits to, like, you know, if we're held back by fear, that holds back ourselves in society. But if we're talking about doing things that are dangerous, there are people with like brain injuries to the frontal lobe that have issues with impulsivity, who might be doing dangerous things all the time. If they stick to that, they may be considered courageous, but they will not be around very long.
Yeah, but
So-
it's more like foolhardy. It's not
Right.
It's not courage. Courage, like first it requires wisdom, so you understand what you're doing, and then you act out of your principles.
Yeah, you need you need to understand that something is dangerous to a certain extent, you know.
So are you only
only
courageous
feel-
if you're successful in whatever the action is?
No,
don't
no,
think so.
absolutely not.
You
'cause-
mean if you survive?
no,
Right? Like, is
lots
there a
of-
survivorship bias here?
no,
I
lots
don't think so.
lots of courageous people are not successful. No, I don't think so.
Well, lots of courageous people don't survive
Yeah.
the act for which they're recognized as being courageous.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's one example. So so yeah, when people say, for example, man up, you know, or be a man, what they really mean is, you know, be courageous. So are the two things you know, linked or not? I don't know.
I don't know, Bruno. I can think of a number of female nurses that I know who would probably come and kick your ass if you said that that's what courage was a masculine thing.
I meant to go grab a strap
there's
on.
all kinds of courage that's exhibited by every human being, and not all the time and not every day, but I suspect we each in our life get our chance to do it. And
but for the most part of human history, it was prompt as a manly thing, and
well, that doesn't mean it's right, does it?
Yeah, sure,
I
of
think
course.
I think what's being circled around here is that traditionally it's been a gender thing, but
yeah,
maybe
but nowadays
maybe it
it's
shouldn't be.
different. Yeah.
Why
Well,
should
I- I-
why should it not be? Like why are we making
Well, I think we can come up with many examples of, let's say, for example, Katie Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They were fairly well ostracized for encouraging and promoting the idea that women should be allowed to vote. They were very courageous, in my opinion, very courageous to put up with the trials and tribulations that they went through in order to bring women's suffrage to the consciousness of Americans. And that's enough examples for me.
Well,
I
just
think-
in Russian history, there's the battlefield courage. I mean, there were Russian women who served in the Soviet army. I mean, there were a lot of Russian snipers. There was also the Russian night witches who flew bombing missions against the Germans in essentially plywood planes.
I mean, I think if before he designated that a bear or a dog or some type of animal can be courageous, I don't think it's in question if it's possible that someone of the opposite sex, seeing as we're all men here, or if I think you all identify, if you don't, I'm sorry, could also be courageous. I don't know if that's the position you and Bruno are taking, Vladimir and Bruno are taking.
No,
necessarily
that's not at
either.
all. That's not at all. Like that's not even the question. Like I'm not asking if a woman can be courageous, which obviously a woman can be courageous. I mean, that's the, you know, that it would be moronic to even ask the question. The question is if the quality in itself, and there's many ways I could phrase this. Like the general idea that I'm proposing is that if there's a connection, it could be a cultural connection even between masculinity and courage. So that's the what
So,
I'm
I mean, a
I've
lot of
seen a
this,
connection, but I've also not seen a connection.
a lot of
Same
this
thing as
derives
with a
from
dog.
virtue ethics, and virtue ethics was basically devised by men for men. So we shouldn't be too surprised that they exhibit what traits that were and are considered to be masculine traits,
Mhm.
right? Because remind me who the great female virtue ethicist writers were of the past that we have surviving writings from, and of course the answer is
Do
there
we have
aren't
any
any.
Hypatia?
To a little bit of extent, but we don't really have that much of Hypatia's writings or teachings recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
wasn't Hypatia
All
also
right, I gotta take
killed?
off, guys.
Well,
Yes, brutally.
that's an interesting point, Craig. And it
you,
makes me
Frank.
wonder, is much of history, well, let's put it this way. Most of the human beings that have died doing courageous acts in war were men. But is that because the women were incapable of doing it? Or because men called the shots?
Or is it because most of the courageous women were dying in childbirth instead?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
it's,
I think it might be a mistake to attribute courage as like a gendered attribute.
well, I don't think it was so much courage. I think it was about capability on the battlefield. I mean, even
But
to
what was
this,
about that? Sorry,
mean,
what?
Now I understand what I think I understand what you're saying, Shir, but we're not talking about the strongest. We're not talking about the most effective at battlefield technologies and battlefield tactics. We're talking about courage. And I think those are two different things.
well, no, but they're related, because why we have a patriarchal society and why even the terms are gendered is basically because women weren't given, in many societies, women weren't given the chance. The reason why, like the Night Witches or the Soviet snipers, are remembered because during World War II, that was very unusual, basically, to have women as part of the military force. I mean, women weren't allowed battlefield positions in the US military until about 10 years ago. I mean, or maybe like 15 years ago, the invasion of Iraq was the first time technically women were legally allowed to serve in battlefield positions for the US military. I mean, you look at the story of Mulan, which is loose, it's quasi mythical. But yeah, the reason why women weren't allowed to be soldiers it was basically because of the belief that they were just terrible fighters.
And men are kind of more rational than women. It's universal trait that women are more, they follow their emotions, and men mostly follow their like reason. And that's probably why it was attributed to men more than to women, because again, fear, it's like if you emotionally stable and if you can control your emotions by your reason, it's like you are more likely to control the fear. But women, they more like more intuitive.
And I know a lot of women mathematicians who would probably come and kick your ass over a statement like that.
Well, at least again, it's I'm talking about history, like as a whole, not last 100 years.
I think history is a pretty bad record of character. You know, we tend to record what we want to record, and we have to remember who's recording it. And then we also have to keep in mind what society is encouraging. So I think it's encouraged, you know, the stereotype of men being courageous and doing brave things and showing bravado, and it's discouraged for men to show certain
Vul-
emotions.
Mhm.
But some emotions are encouraged, like outbursts of anger is a pretty emotional thing that's more susceptible or acceptable for men for some reason.
Right, but this idea that women are less rational or more scared easily, I think is a rationalization that's developed basically because men were soldiers. I think the original difference basically has to be there is some sexual dimorphism. I mean, men tend to be stronger on average, particularly upper body strength. So if you go back, a man throwing a spear or swinging a club is going to have more force. Your average man will have much more force than your average women. Therefore, that upper body strength makes a difference going back to being a hunter.
Does that mean
Versus-
that courage is stored in the muscles? What does that mean?
No, that just means that from that early day, that difference ended up channeling saying men tended to be hunters and fighters, whereas women tended then to kind of fulfill the other roles of dealing with household. It's basically just to be kind of Jared Diamond like. It's basically an environmental determination about
So,
the sexual
I
dimorphism.
understand what you're saying. The way I would say that, and it may be inelegant, but courage is not a property of strength from my point of view.
It's true, but I think that Sashir, like in a way, he's referring to something that, okay, I'm just gonna rephrase it a little bit, like the way I see it, like in this case, because I think we're talking about it without talking about it. Like, there's an association, like I was talking about the Japanese culture, right, where courage is is a central value of that culture, or was until recently. And the reason I think why courage becomes a central value in a culture historically, if you go back to the root of that, it's because it is closely associated to the military aspect of it, right? So in Japan, because of the historical circumstances, war became very, very important. So, and because for a warrior, courage is so important, that means like basically courage is in high demand, right? Courage is in high demand, and it's associated with war, which is waged by men. So in a way, courage becomes a property of men. So there is a historical connection there, which makes sense when you look at the formation of these things. Now, does that mean that courage will, it is a property, in fact, of men, or does it mean that historically, because it is associated with war, it has been associated with men? I mean, I don't know.
It also,
That's why I think these are interesting questions to kind of like deconstruct, so we understand what's going on.
it also was associated with religion, not only with war. So like you have to take courage to face your death, and like since we are kind of rational beings, we understand that we are mortal. It's creates a kind of anxiety. So like as soon as you know that you will die at some moment, it's like it makes you feel, it's like it disrupts your ability to be happy basically, because you're
Yeah.
always like under this pressure of knowing that at some moment like you'll die. And courage from religious perspective just helps you like live your life without being constantly overwhelmed by this fear. So it's not just war, going to war and fight. It's also really, and in modern times, it's also, I read this another article, it's also about sport competition. So in sport, there are lots of like people also encourage sportsmen to compete, and
You know what that is? It's because sport is a simulation of war in a sense.
yeah.
When you look at football, either football, it's a simulation of war. That's really what it represents to some level in our troglodyte brain.
A kind of
Right.
safe way to to do war.
Yeah, it's exactly what we figured out, a very safe way to do war. And yeah, you still get injured in, even in association football
I guess the safe,
soccer, but it's a whole
safety,
lot safer than war. Any
the
any kind of
safe,
football is safer than
the
war.
safetiest way is video games where you might just
True. Video games are now more
yeah.
safe. Yeah. Look, maybe that's why esports are going to become more popular than American football or soccer. It's because it's even more safe and it's still fun.
Right.
Yeah.
What kind of basically what I'm saying, kind of following up on Bruno, is that the issue of kind of sexual dimorphism, which kind of led to these cultural, it is basically culture was kind of built off of these. And in many ways, the arguments whether women are less courageous or the terms of how we talk about courage, I guess in better sense, is masculinized, is again because the opportunities weren't given. I'll give a couple examples. Is even just recently, they've changed the requirements regarding Army Ranger School. In a long time, there was the big resistance towards allowing women into Army Ranger School was that they're saying, well, we don't want to have women because then we'd have to water down the standards for Army Ranger, the physical standards for Army Ranger School. Does that mean a woman couldn't be an Army Ranger? In terms of, yes, a woman certainly could be as good of a sniper, as good as many other things. Could a woman do as many push-ups, as many pull-ups, carry as much weight as your average man? No. And that was the difference, was they're saying, well, we don't want to water these physical standards down. But if you look at, so right there is just basically argument, since there weren't any female Army Rangers, you can argue, well, Army Rangers are the most brave people in the world, in the US military. Well, how do we know? Because they do all these missions. Well, why aren't women as brave as Army Rangers? Well, no, because we've never had a woman as an Army Ranger.
Of course,
you
if
see
the
how-
physical criteria is the main determination there, when they're all replaced by robots, which will probably happen in the next 10 or 15 years, I guess we'll be saying that the robots are the most courageous guys on the battlefield then, because they're the ones who have the greatest strength and can become rangers, because if that's the standards that they're setting, they're basically asking for that.
Yeah, and what came to my mind while you guys were talking was, and I'm thinking about war because it's a threat to the physical self more so than a sport, ideally. And so I was trying to figure out, was Alvin York braver than Rosa Parks? Because they both risked physical harm to accomplish the things they accomplished.
I don't know who Alvin Park was. I'm sorry.
Alvin York, Sergeant York, World War One. He was a hero,
Okay, so
a war hero.
Okay. Well, that's kind of what I was getting at, actually. Different kinds of courage. Right?
Well,
I mean, we can split it into like there's manly courage and then there's womanly courage, and they're different, but we should probably stick with a simple definition. Courage is when we face our fear instead of giving into it. And fear is a human trait. Everybody has the capacity to feel fear and also the capacity to, act in spite of it. And I think that means anybody can be courageous. It doesn't have to be a gendered trait. I think there's stress from physical threat. And if there's a bunch of men in battle, because those are the only people who go into battle facing physical threat, that's one kind of courage. But you can measure stress responses from social situations or just, emotional situations that are just as intense as, stress from physical threat. And, reacting to that, you could quantify it and say maybe these people are just as courageous. And it doesn't, again, have to be a gendered thing.
I've got one more example dealing with how kind of these kind of stereotypes or these views of who is courageous. One of the arguments in the Civil War against having Black soldiers on the Union side was that blacks were cowards. Blacks weren't courageous. And that seems, we look at that, and we're talking about black men, we look at that as completely ridiculous. But the argument did go, well, if blacks weren't, were as courageous as white men, were willing to fight as much, well, why were they taken as slaves anyway to begin with? Or basically they just looked at them as inferior, that the only way to control black men is in controlling them through fear. Therefore, they'd make terrible soldiers because they wouldn't be willing to go and risk their lives for the mission or for each other, because all they could react from is fear. And we kind of look back at that as being, well, that's completely ridiculous. That doesn't make sense. We know black soldiers fight as well as white soldiers or soldiers of any race. But that was the point, was that the culture had denied them the opportunity to prove themselves. And part of the big change out of having the Massachusetts 54th was the realization, well, black soldiers are as brave as any soldiers. And in the end, even at the end of the Civil War, even the South had black soldiers, because they started realizing, well, one, we need people, and these people actually can fight.
Well, what I don't know is why a black person would fight for the Confederacy. I mean, that, like,
Robert E. Lee actually
Yeah, why?
advocated for it, and the deal is that if you fought for the Confederacy, it would give you your freedom.
Oh, that's a good incentive. So what your point is exactly that are black people like women in your case? Like, is that the analogy you're establishing?
Oh, it is the reason why we think we refer to courage in terms of gender and things like that, is that the idea of how you talk about courage is very much a cultural construct. The people who tend not to be considered courageous, it wasn't so much that there wasn't courage within women or courage within black people or anybody else. It's really just because historically they were denied the opportunities to prove themselves as a group.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah, plus the people who get lionized by the culture is, well, lionized as in the dominant male lion, right? We see that in poetry, in literature, in that throughout, coming from Greek culture, coming from Arabic culture, coming from East Asian culture. It seems to be something. And I think it does probably all trace back to the fact that warfare was a man's game. And that's also at that point, writing was a man's game. And the two kind of went hand in hand. And so we shouldn't, again, be too shocked that that's the tradition that we were handed.
It's funny. There was a civil war in Liberia, I think. And it went on and on and on for years. And the army was kidnapping young boys and giving them guns and teaching them how to fight. And it went on for a decade at least. And ultimately it ended because the grandmothers had had enough. And they decided to tell their sons and grandsons, stop fighting in this war. It doesn't make any sense. And the war ended. So I have to think maybe, I wonder, have we had so many wars in the past because men were in charge?
Hey, Lysistrata, man, women go on suck strike, and the war ends like that.
Yeah.
Well, for sure. I mean, what is war? If war is a form of aggression. Well, it's aggression. It's also you're also like figuring out some stuff that needs to be figured out. But it's aggression, and that's a male trait. Aggression. Like, women don't have that trait in the same amount. Now, why that is, it might be a little bit cultural. It's for sure biological to some extent. But that's another thing about the courage thing, right? Is that it's hard to differentiate courage and aggression, which is kind of like something we touched on in the beginning. And it's not a simple thing, to differentiate both. When you look at an outstanding soldier, it's hard to say, you know, how much of that is aggression, how much of that is courage, right? So, um, you know, it's a difficult thing to differentiate totally. And again, you know, and going back to the, is that a male trait, is that a female trait? In a female, you probably won't see that, right? What you'll see is probably more just the natural courage rather than the natural aggression. But that also means that that sort of behavior that we traditionally associate with courage, that's probably going to come from a man a lot more often than from a woman. So it's kind of like a web. It's hard to untangle.
And it may take both. I mean, for example, we couldn't have landed on the moon without engineers and mathematicians. We needed both skill sets to accomplish that goal.
So get Craig's attention here for a second. So Craig, if you remember God Emperor of Dune, the fish speakers, so that's a Frank Herbert, now one of the sequels to Dune, was that the God Emperor had an elite guard of all women under the theory that the women actually, because of their maternal instincts, would actually be far better protectors, and that they would fight, they would fight to the death, not just out of this idea of loyalty or the idea, but because of maternal belief, and that they'd be more willing to protect the populace of it.
Sure. Well, I mean, getting even a little closer, we'll go back to Black Panther and the Dora Milaje, who were the imperial guard of the Wakandan king, Wakandan royalty. And again, it's an all-female body of guard. I would not be shocked to find out there's an actual real historical precedent for something like that. I wouldn't be shocked. I don't know of one, but I wouldn't be shocked if there were.
Well, there's the Amazons, but they weren't necessarily a female protector force. I mean, they were just a tribe of warrior women.
Yeah, and yeah, we don't know how fictional or non-fictional that is. I will.
Themyscira was definitely fictional.
Themyscira, sure, absolutely.
Oh boy, I can think of female primates, not so much female women. I mean, humans. Like female primates, you can think of.
Oh yeah.
Like bears, for example. A female bear is a lot more dangerous than a male bear if she has cubs around,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see that with animals a lot. And I think with females, it's the same thing regarding their cubs, regarding their babies, except that doesn't translate to war necessarily.
Well, I don't know. You could go ask Bruno and probably
they're very fierce. They're
very nice fierce. Knowing you, Bruno.
I know they're very fierce, but they usually don't carry a rifle, which is probably a good thing.
I tend to think so. Somewhere in the various steppes and plains in Central Asia, that there were mounted women archers who were considered in some ways to be elite troops there. So in that sense, it's kind of modeled after the Amazon, I suppose, idea, but I seem to remember that. I don't remember if it was the Scythians or the Huns or whom that might be, but the Tartars.
Well, there were the Viking shield maidens.
Certainly.
Which actually did exist, although they weren't as prominent as like in the.
And there's that culture in the Himalayas that's matriarchal instead of patriarchal. But those are the exceptions,
Yeah, with humans, I think it's very difficult, because men are so much stronger than women, and I think that until very recently, that just played too much of a role,
Well, not just stronger, but also more expendable.
I don't know about that, but I think
Greg said that I didn't.
No, I'll send it and I'll stand by it.
But it's just it's a big difference in strength, and also, like I was saying before, in aggressiveness, and that is a quality that in normal day life it's not necessary, but in war, I mean, you want aggressive soldiers.
No, and part of the reason culturally for that aggressiveness is actually to cull the male part of the herd, because you want to have a smaller number of males compared to females, because how can we say this? One guy can impregnate a lot of women. It doesn't work so well the other way around, which is why you actually would want a higher proportion of women to men in a lot of those situations. So what do you do with your excess men? You send them off to conquer their neighbors.
I was just going to mention that right before you said it, I thought of it and you beat me to it. But I wonder if there's an evolutionary basis, like Craig is saying, where if some of the men end up dying, well, all of the women could still end up having the same number of babies, and whereas the reverse is not necessarily true. So
there's an issue of like genetic bottlenecks and breeding, like inbreeding, if that's the case. Like you don't want to have the ratio to be too large.
Yeah, although in those cases, that's of course why whichever group happens to win the particular battles, what do? They go and take female slaves from the conquered tribes. And in a sense, one of the things that does is give them genetic diversity. I mean, that's kind of a crude way of looking at it, but it did. And
that's why evolution isn't it's an amoral process, and we don't really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I kind of want to go back to the point about aggression and like being a good thing for war, because I'm not sure that it is. I think if you're aggressive and you're charging into battle, it might work if it's a long time ago and there are like spears and you're in the Roman Empire. But if you have to think tactically or make split-second critical decisions, you might not want to be coursing with adrenaline. You might want to be clear-headed about the decisions you're making. That might serve you better.
That's why you have officers, though. Soldiers don't think. But, this is kind of, it's not a philosophical conversation as much as, which is fine, but yeah, but that's what officers are there for, man. It's they tell people what to do.
You can't.
What happens when they're just as aggressive as the soldiers?
Also, can't win a war without privates.
Without what? Sorry.
Privates.
Yeah.
It takes both.
Yeah, of course. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, you need more privates than you need, officers. Yeah. A lot more.
I'm
just
rephrasing.
This logic, though,
I'm just rephrasing what you're saying.
Yeah, you're doing it better. Yeah.
We should probably have, like all female majors and corporals and whatnot by that logic, though, right?
That's not what I'm saying. And
I don't think women are.
That's what you interpreted out of what I said. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't think women are necessarily better, but at that, I think you're right. I mean, you need, in the officer position, it's not, aggressiveness is not as important as, the ability to think. That's why they get people that are, more educated, more intelligent to be officers as a general rule.
And I can see George Patton coming up out of his grave to come and kick your ass over that.
Well, he would be flattered, he would say, yeah, I'm super intelligent.
Guys, I gotta run. This has been fun.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, we can, yeah.
All right.
And happy belated birthday.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
No, but I mean, officers need to be courageous as well, but they also need to be the thinking type, when you think about the great officers, great generals, they're pretty intelligent people.
Well, in the modern battlefield, aggression actually still plays a pretty big role. I mean,
yeah.
A lot of this, though, has to do with the willingness to take the initiative on it.
Well, you need to be very aggressive in order not to be scared, or you don't need to be, but it's a lot easier, it's a lot easier. So that also plays into the courage thing. Like the being aggressive kind of like allows you to get over that that obstacle. Like if you're not aggressive and you think about things a lot, I imagine, because I've never been in that situation, but it must be really hard to charge the enemy when they're holding rifles.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of stories, even from the battlefields of Afghanistan, about soldiers charging, basically taking the initiative to go and charge the enemy, and that basically tilts the battle.
Yeah. Well, and yeah. Anyways, Vladimir, what did you think about our discussion about courage? Was this how did this compare to your other group?
Well, my group, I guess, is more easier since we're like our basic purpose is just to speak English and learn to communicate. But I think like we're talking basically about physical courage, and I'm more interested in moral courage and in everything which relates to thinking and imagination. So how can we be courageous in our thoughts? And everybody decide what to do with their lives, and it seems that this trait, so if you are courageous, you may just aim higher and like think about yourself, like whom you want to be. And society here, it gives kind of very vague perspective. So when you like surrounded by people who just don't have any ambitious goals and everybody just wants to be the same, just to have, for example, there's difference in two types of culture. It's like kind of old culture and new culture, and if you choose to follow patterns which are predominant in old culture, for example, you may get married, go to work, and just live a normal life. It's kind of it's not courageous. But if you decide to try something new, to probably stay, to choose something to do that is not popular in society, but still you may just try to do that and see, like, even if people are against that, you still try, and you try to try to develop some new type of culture by just courage helps you to do that. Again, I got confused. Just
No. I think that's
what-
fascinating, man. I
Yeah.
honestly, I feel that's a very interesting point of view.
Once again, the idea is that it's like courage in a moral sense, like in your thoughts, it helps you to like to dream, maybe again to dream, to
Yeah.
find something, some purpose in life, which may be above some general purposes which are usually presented by society as a norm.
Yeah, I think that's really that's something that's really interesting that we didn't really talk about. So we haven't talked about so far. Like moral courage, and also like similar thing, like kind of like an intellectual courage, right? Because
Mhm.
you can be like intellectually coward, like when you go along with what everybody else expects you to say or to think. I think that's a form of intellectual cowardice. And then, you have people that are intellectually courageous. When being intellectually courageous is when you say things that people, there's not going to be a crowd that is going to, cheer you, and this day and age, I mean, it's really about, most people either choose one thing or the other, and they go along with the crowd. But it's unusual to see people that will just say something completely different. And the hell with, consequences or what the rest of the group is going to think. Like Thoreau, for example, is intellectually courageous, right?
Mhm.
Saying stuff that, nobody, like Mexican American is unfair. The Mexican American War is unfair. And, you're not going to pay taxes, and, you're going to go live in a cabin. I mean, that's, but it's what he believed in, right? Right or wrong, it was intellectually courageous. So I think that's, I think that's an interesting way of looking at things.
Or like being an entrepreneur, starting a business, even if a lot of people aren't sure it's going to be successful. That's kind of what it reminded me of when Vladimir was talking about like the courage of like developing an ambition that other people might not have.
Well, Elon Musk is a great example. Like at the
Elon
beginning, when he started, nobody believed like in his ideas, and later, like he was able to just to do
Well,
what he.
You know, you
does.
have the 9 to 5, right? I mean, Elon Musk. Yeah, to me, that's kind of like hard to relate to, like a billionaire. But like you have something that most people face. Almost everybody in society faces is like today. Are you going to comply to society's like scheme, right? Society's mechanism of you work like your job and you do like It's like I don't know if you guys like Fight Club, but in Fight Club, he at some point they have this conversation about, I was supposed I haven't seen the movie in a while, but it was basically, hey, I was supposed to I think he was saying like he was talking to his dad, right? So his dad told him to go to school, and then now what, Dad? Now go, get a degree, Okay, he gets a degree. Now what, Dad? Oh, get a job. He gets a job, and now what, Dad? Oh, get married. He gets married, and then now what? Oh, get a house. Okay, he gets a house. Now what? Oh, I don't know. Like there's nothing after that, but that's really just like the scheme of society, right? You go to school, you get a degree, you work your 9 to 5 job, you get a wife, you got some kids, and then at some point life's over, then you die, but it's safe. It's a safe thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. And the point is like if you take courage and start thinking on your own for yourself, you immediately find that everybody, like people usually oppress it. People don't like that you just propose something new and start acting according to your beliefs and ideas.
Yeah, you got to be ready to be attacked, because
Yeah.
people are going to attack you because you're doing something different.
Bruno, you forgot the first rule of Fight Club
Yeah, I did. You're right.
and the second rule of Fight Club.
And the second rule as well. Yeah.
This might be a better topic for another time, but I've always kind of found it interesting. I think there's kind of first a difference between Eastern and Western society about individual versus the group, and kind of how group dynamics are much more important. But I think in Western, particularly our society, there's this real kind of fetishization of the individual and this idea of you got to do your own thing. And the thing I find kind of really funny is seeing commercials. Like there's an Xfinity commercial where they play Go Your Own Way. And then they show like people, and it's always, you got to do your own thing. Just be yourself. Yeah, you'll be cool. And most of society, it's odd to have something appealing to mass consumption, telling you to do your own thing. And I think it's kind of this weird fetishization of our society, how we encourage people to be yourself. But I don't think we really believe that.
It's like buying all your kids matching T-shirts that say "Be unique."
Yes, exactly.
Like everybody else, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, sure, I think you put it brilliantly. Like, yeah, we're all saying that, but nobody believes it, right?
I mean, if we talk about courage, because we say, okay, well, it's cool. We got, they show this commercial of a dude, with pink hair playing a guitar. Yeah, this guy's cool. But I mean, really, if everybody did that, how often, and on top of that, and frankly, for, a lot of us, it's easy to say somebody who's, 25 in perfect shape with pink hair playing a guitar. Yeah, versus somebody who's, and sorry to the older gentleman who's over 50 and out of shape with pink hair playing guitar. Yeah, that guy's doing his thing.
You're calling people old and out of shape this year.
Yeah, sorry. I'm at the pub. Give me a break.
You better. No, I mean, look, nobody's
Someday
over.
it's gonna be you, kid.
No, nobody's over 50 here.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's in great shape, man.
That me, yeah.
No, nobody's
Hold on a second, let me show you my abs.
probably nobody's in great shape because
Oh, will you? Oh, boy.
If I have COVID abs, they're not quite as abby as before.
Yes, well,
but yeah, I agree. Like the being intellectually courageous. That's another form of courage, but it's very relevant.
Yeah, it's also not necessarily about acting. It may be like you may just think, and just thinking itself may be acting, and it kind of it has an impact on your life, and you may like in my like I want to give a personal example. For me, I mostly live in my kind of in my stream of consciousness. What's going on around, it's not too much important. So I'm trying to like focus on my thoughts and learn what's going on like inside rather than focus on external environment and like people, all these, everything what's going on outside. It's like for me, it's more about studying myself and learning who I am, what I'm doing, why I'm doing that, recording my, everything what goes through my mind and through my imagination. And this kind of in like people usually react to it in a very suspicious way. So they think that if you go inside and if you just study yourself, there's something wrong with you. There's something like why should you do that if you are like everybody else? Why should you concern about all these ideas, questions, philosophy? Because real philosophy, what is real philosophy? It's just you like love to wisdom. So you learn like you learn basically everything. You try to understand what's going on in your in your world. And so when you start thinking, when you start living this like ask courageous, like ask questions which people usually don't ask, when you try to answer these questions, try to pose them in a way which may help you to develop yourself in a kind of intellectual way, it looks very unusual for people because if you have this conversation just with people like
It's
in
also
the
very
street.
threatening. It's not just weird, it's threatening. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you just kind of summed up all of philosophy there with your questions, right? Basically, who am I? What can I know? And how should I live? Those are in many ways the three fundamental questions of philosophy.
but the idea is that people usually don't like to talk about it. So if you
No, they
really
don't.
if you really ask like somebody how much time they dedicated thinking about these questions, like usually people say like we don't it's like why should you think about it? It's like it's something abnormal, something
They have to make fun of you for it. Like, look at this guy. He's always just thinking all the time.
exactly. And then you start, well, it's if it's important for me, if it has value for me, should I really go further and investigate, like study philosophy, study myself, or I should just conform common beliefs and ideas and be like everybody else. So in my case,
we have a name for those people who laugh at us for thinking like that. We like to call them muggles.
Muggles. Yeah, I don't even know what the word means by
muggles. It comes from the Harry Potter books for the people who don't know, who have no magic. Yeah, the normals, the mundanes, or whatever you want to call them otherwise. Muggles, I think
it's weird for me. It's weird to understand. I mean, I don't consider myself like a genius or anything, but it's not necessarily about intelligence, but it's hard for me to understand how people go through life without trying to without almost like without being consumed by the need to ask questions, because for me, it's like such an essential part of like my way of going about things, so it's really hard for me to see it from the perspective of people who are not, and it's surprising that like so many people like go through life without asking a lot of questions. Like it's like I'm not like I'm being genuine. Like it's weird for me to understand that.
Except a
I
lot of
thought-
society
Same
is
here.
not to ask questions. I mean, again, if we're talking philosophers and know thyself, I mean, Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian society for asking questions. He
Why do
willingly chose to go to death.
Why do people have that aversion, or is it something that people don't usually consider? Is it not like a natural thing? Because for me, it's natural. Like I don't understand how it's not natural for other people.
I think it might actually be somewhat rational for
Yeah, yeah.
people. but not-
Uh,
So here's kind of, I've thought about this a little bit, but I think a lot of the people in this group are maybe smarter than the average bunch. So, but like some people, they might think about a certain question and they might feel like they're not really making much progress, or they might not be that confident in their ability to think through that philosophy question. And so they stop doing it. And that might actually be a reasonable thing, because if they feel like they're not confident in their abilities to think through these things, or it's not really getting them anywhere, then maybe they should just stop it. So I think that might be a part
I
of
feel the same way about doing my taxes.
it.
Now,
Yeah.
if I can relate one thing, and Vladimir, it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody else, but it might you. I don't believe in God, and in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, the first atheist I knowingly saw was in the mirror, and there can be, from my perspective, no better example of going your own way.
How do you know there weren't, maybe there were other people that
There-
were, but they
there-
just didn't say it?
I said knowingly.
No, oh, knowingly. Okay, you did caveat it. That's
Yeah.
my bad.
I mean, religion, yeah, religion is one way in which you see that kind of like mass compliance, right? Mass compliance, which might be forced. You know, I understand the forced aspect of it a lot better than I understand the unforced aspect. Like, I understand why people were Catholics for so long. That to me is very clear, because if you weren't a Catholic, you might find yourself, you know, in a bad place, you know, not necessarily killed, you know, like if you said it out loud, you'd probably get killed, right? But you know, like
Bruno Giordano.
yeah,
look him up.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Giordano Bruno, you know, he said it out loud though. I mean,
Yeah, I got his name backwards. Sorry.
but I mean, no, but that's what I'm talking about, right? Like it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a nice thing not to be a Catholic. It was, there were, you know, you had to be a Catholic, right? Or, you know, if you're in a different part, maybe an Orthodox or a Protestant or a Muslim, you know, so that I understand. What I don't understand is like when those chains go off, like the mass compliance, it becomes less, you know, easy to understand.
Well,
I think a lot of people aren't confident in their own thoughts and ability to think through things. So they take the sort of perspective of other people because of their own sort of discomfort.
Yeah, it's also kind of burned into the cultures too, and so there's a lot of resistance one has to go through in order to do sometimes fairly mundane things.
And
while
I
being
think
different.
I think if you start when a human being is young enough, you can get them to believe just about anything.
Mhm. Oh, no doubt.
Definitely.
Well, but that, again, there's questions of social order. I mean, Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth, and that's undermining social order.
Well, Socrates got the stick, right? Like he was kind of like Giordano Bruno, but you know, obviously the Greeks were a little bit more permissive. But you know, when you look at Socrates, you know, maybe they weren't that permissive. You know, if you went out of line a little bit too much, maybe you know you got hit with the stick.
Right. Yeah. But that was, yeah, Socrates was charged with, because he was having these meetings with the young. And so they and said, well, he's corrupting the social order. He's questioning people in that.
Well,
It was also at a time when Athens was under stress too, when already the threat of the Spartans was present.
yeah, no, and
Society under threat is going to be much more rigid in their thinking.
yeah, and
And
I was
so-
talking about the religion aspect because, part of the reason why he got killed was obviously the religious aspect.
Yes, he questioned the existence of the gods too, but this specific charge was undermining the youth.
Yeah, I mean, it's both. It was both. It was.
We brought up Hypatia earlier, and she was killed by the people of Alexandria because she was challenging the social norms
Mhm.
of Alexandria.
And it's actually a great example how intellectual or moral courage can be developed. So one person is killed for, pursuing what they think is right to do, and then other people see how after a few hundred years it becomes like reversed. So first this person is condemned to death, and then after a few hundred years or 100 years, people start seeing that actually this person was right, and they want to kind of copy his way of behavior, his way of thinking, and try to this probably may be right thing. If I just oppose society, if I oppose social norms, cultural norms, I also may become a hero like this person who became a hero like in the past. And it prompts you, it just prompts you to think in a different way and develop courage and just do something else. But again, it's sometimes it may just lead to some stupid things like you brought before about be yourself and just do something different. So courage requires wisdom first. So first you gain wisdom to understand what's actually going on and what you need to do and what you shouldn't do, and then you gain courage just to act upon your understanding.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think if you look at Christianity, I mean, Jesus was.
Yeah, it's almost the same. It's almost the same example, like Socrates and Jesus. If you consider them in a historical perspective, Plato was the same, like Apostle Paul. Jesus, like Socrates, was kind of mythological person. Plato wrote all these dialogues, and then Socrates became popular. And the same in Christianity. There were Christ, and then after that, they started developing this, like mythological personality, like cult of personality. There's so many similarities between Socrates and school, like this school of thought and Christian school of thought. In fact, Nietzsche, if you, I remember this book, Beyond Good and Evil. It's like he draws a clear analogy between Platonism and Christianism. He calls Platonism is Christianism for the people. So it's basically all these Platonic ideas. They are almost the same ideas as we have in Christianity.
There are some parallels if you think about it. Yeah.
I think Christianity ended up taking a lot of Platonic ideals. I blame St. Augustine for that.
They were pretty big on Aristotle too.
Christians?
Yeah, but the base idea is like immortality. When there's an idea of soul that you just have nothing to fear because your physical death means nothing. If you have soul, your soul is like immortal and you shouldn't fear anything. It's so mind-boggling for people who actually are afraid of dying and who have this anxiety and fear of death. If you are able to persuade them, to convince them that they're immortal, in like they have some part in them which will survive their physical death, it's like you may basically, if you convince somebody in childhood that this is the case, you may make them like do whatever you.
Yeah, it's a good way to get them to grow up and fight for you.
Yeah, it's like a
Not about
perfect tool of manipulation and control.
You might even persuade some to fly planes in the buildings.
Yeah.
Going back a little bit to like what you're saying before, Vladimir, about the intellectual courage and what I was saying that I don't understand why people don't ask more questions, I guess. But like the education system, I think might be part of that, because on one hand, when people don't read, I think it's harder to, so if you don't have input, you don't have much of an output, right? So if you don't like consume ideas, it's also hard to develop ideas. But then you have an education, modern education systems are very oppressive as well, you know. Yes, they do give you that input, they do give you ideas, you know, in the form of books and textbooks and all that, but it's all done in a very oppressive way. Like well, not to speak of the fact that education systems are pretty bad in a number of countries, like you know, like this one. But in general, I think the modern education systems, they just give you stuff and you're supposed to basically copy stuff and reproduce it. But the way people are taught to think in a way that is not, like you say, courageous, right? They're taught in a way like thinking courageously doesn't really get you through school very well. You know, what gets you through school is thinking in a reproductive way, like when you reproduce things
Yeah, I think education is not about like in school, for example, it's mostly about keeping children busy, making them do something. It's not actually developing their minds and ideas, because yeah, as you said, they just feed you with information, and your primary task is to remember and then regurgitate whatever you learn.
Mm-hmm.
And the actual essence of education, it must be like you learn to think, you learn to develop your ideas, you learn to develop like your understanding. And to develop understanding, you must think. You can't just memorize stuff. And
how, for example,
oppressive.
For example, to your point, for example, philosophy, right? If you're studying
Yeah.
Plato, like how can you understand Plato if the whole point is for you to read something and copy it and reproduce it, right?
Yeah, the idea is just start thinking like what is philosophy. It's like you first you need to think, then to figure out that you know nothing, and only then you may just came up with some questions, start reading and find some different points, and you know, find your own point, try to develop. Like when I think, for example, I take like this question, courage. So I never thought before about it. When I started thinking on Monday, I couldn't come up with any idea. So I spent like 8 hours on Monday trying to make up questions and think, and I couldn't write anything, no paper. And after that, it's like for the entire day trying to point my attention on this question and just asking myself constantly, what do I know, how it can be interesting to discuss. Next day, I started just writing, like just writing an imaginary dialogue between me and my group in a conversation. And I wrote like 8 pages of of just a dialogue,
Wow.
like scenario for a conversation. And I figured out that, oh, there's so many things which I can't understand, but now at least I know something. And then I started reading stuff like Aristotle, some articles, Wikipedia articles, some definitions, and it made it so clear. So I immediately started understanding it, like what it is, how it works, how I can apply it for my life. I started seeing all different examples, like in my personal experience. I started finding like moments when I was a coward, moments when I was like foolhardy, moments when I was close to like being courageous. And it's like reshaped like the whole experience which I had before in my life. So
And from my perspective, if I understand what you just said, from my perspective, wisdom comes from having gone through doing something that wasn't courageous or making a mistake. In other words, though, I don't really trust people who have never made a mistake, who have never
you
said
can
anything wrong, because I don't understand where they get their wisdom from.
Are there people who have never made a mistake? I want to
Well,
meet those people, man.
some politicians.
you can't learn anything without making mistakes. So mistakes actually teach you what's right, what's wrong. and you after you make a mistake, you only then you understand like what works, what doesn't
And-
work.
I make mistakes every day,
And-
let
and-
alone my whole life without making mistakes.
In a very real way, contemplating questions such as these and discussing them with intelligent people like yourselves grind and polish the lens through which we view the world. And they influence conversations that we have with other people in our lives.
That's some beautiful philosophical poetry.
Good, I think so. I have to go.
Well, I
Yep.
think this was a good time to
Claude and
end.
I.
So yeah, thanks a lot. Do you guys want to do some final remarks? And I don't want to cut anyone up before. Do you absolutely need to say something that is very important for mankind?
Do any of you have the courage to make a closing argument? Or
I already
closing-
made mine.
What is the first rule of Fight Club?
We all know that. I broke it, but we all know it.
Yeah, you already broke it.
I think the more fun question would be, what is the last rule of Fight Club?
I don't even
Hmm.
know.
When it's over, it's over.
Oh, wow. Good one. Good one, guys. I've seen that movie like 20 times. I didn't remember.
All right, you gonna play a song for us, Sashir?
No,
Oh, guys,
I not.
No?
Yeah, Vladimir has some final remarks. So
I forgot. I memorized the poem on the beginning of this week.
Oh, cool.
It was Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Do you know this?
William
guy,
Ernest.
no?
Who?
William Ernest Henley. It's like 19th century poet. I will just read the poem if you don't mind.
this is great. Usually we have music. Now we have poetry. Like, where do I find you guys?
Out of the fear, out of the night that covers me, beyond, wait, once again. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears, looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. There's like an amazing narration of this poem. Well, I'll give a link.
Thank you, Vladimir. I really
yeah.
appreciate you guys. Man, Sashir prepares songs for us. Vladimir prepares poems.
I had not
I feel
prepared a
humbled.
song at all. Sorry.
All right, Michael, you're gonna have to prove some theorems, I think, at the end of.
I think, yeah, Michael, you're next, man. You gotta figure out what you're gonna do.
Figure something out. Sounds good.
You might need to like come up with a dance or something, or no, like a theorem would be more your thing. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Man, no, you guys are amazing.
We need Quan to cook something.
Yeah, yes.
Cook something on YouTube just makes people, a little bit upset, because you can't eat it.
He can be just like Zizek. It'll be good.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming.
Good night.
This would
Thank
be-
you.
and Vladimir, it's like 6 o'clock in the morning. So
Yeah, I'm going to
go to bed, man. All right. Bye-bye, guys. Thank
See
you
you.
so much.
Bye-bye.